And now we're going to read about the influence of a godly mother, starting in verse 19. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. You see, the distance between Shiloh and Ramah was about 15 miles. It's more than likely that Hannah visited her son more than once a year. And notice her expression of love. She makes him this little cute robe. And notice that she never stops loving her son. And in our lives, there are some lessons that we can learn from Hannah, especially if you're a mom or a dad. How do you raise godly children? How do we do this? Number one, if you're a mom or dad, this is for you. If you're a mom, never underestimate the influence you have on your kids. I think about what Paul, writing to Timothy, said about the faith of his mother and grandmother. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, he says this, I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. You see, Samuel is a little boy living in the midst of this corrupt system. But here's the cool thing. He has godly parents, and the godly influence of his life, in a huge part, is due to his parents. Secondly, as a mom or dad, know this. Your personal struggles will shape your child's faith. Think about Hannah. Think about being provoked by Peninnah in the previous verses. Think about how many years she cried out to God and how many years she prayed. Now you might ask yourself, why am I suffering? Why does my life feel like a living hell right now? It could be that God wants to use your story one day and use the story right now to influence the faith of your son or your daughter. How many times, I can imagine, Samuel heard the story of his miraculous birth. How many times did his mom Hannah sit by his bed and tell him how she cried out to God and God answered? You see, our personal struggles will shape our child's faith. Another point is this, number 3, dedicate your kids to the Lord and allow them to follow their calling. As a parent, you may want your son or daughter to be a doctor or an entrepreneur or an engineer or maybe a teacher. But what if God calls your son or daughter to be a missionary or to be a social worker or to do something else where they're following God's calling? Would you allow that? Like Hannah, would you dedicate your son to the Lord and allow him to serve wherever God called him? Next is this. Raising godly children also involves loving your kids and serving them in tangible ways. As parents, it's easy to say, I know I love my kids. It's easy to say, well, I tell my kids that I love them. But do they really see us serving them in tangible ways? Do we really demonstrate that? You see, here Hannah is making a little robe. But the question to ask yourself, and the question I ask myself is this. How are you tangibly serving your kids? Are we too busy with our lives? Are we too busy with our careers to even serve them? You see, kids don't really care about how much we say until they see that we care. Even at a young age, that's so true. And finally, when it comes to raising kids, we learned this from Hannah and Elkanah. Live your faith and don't be fake. Live your faith and don't be fake. You see, for many parents, they make this sudden decision to go to church when they decide, wait a minute, my kids need morals. They're becoming teenagers now, and they need some values. And so they decide to start going to church. And that's not a bad thing at all. But it's a bad thing if your life at home doesn't change, if there's no evident godliness in your heart at home. Many other people live by this proverb, and I'm sure you've heard of this before. Proverbs 22 verse 6 says this, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now here's the catch. Some people only apply this to that word training. They say, well, if I teach them enough Bible stories or teach them enough Bible verses or send them to church, then maybe they'll grow up to be godly people. But that's not really what that word train means. You see, the Hebrew root of that word is to put a taste in someone's mouth. And it's actually derived from this context. You see, ancient Bedouins, they would take honey from dates and put it in the mouth of babies to incite the sucking reflex. And the whole idea is this. Do we as believers, do we create a taste or a thirst for God in the hearts of our kids? Do our kids see that in how we live? You know, Abraham Lincoln, quoting this verse, said this: "For a man to train up a child in the way that he should go, has to walk that way himself." You see, that's what Samuel's parents did. They walked that way themselves. In your home, this can mean teaching your kids how to pray. It can mean showing them how to forgive someone. It can mean talking to them about their emotions, about how to pray with God as you're going through a season with grief. It can mean showing them how to serve people. Here's the whole point: live your faith and don't be fake. And Samuel would have seen that in his mom.